late, and you guys had rain here this morning, I understand. Yeah, you did? Boy, we got hit in Heber, too. It was coming down. It was a whole animal shelter full of dogs and cats and everything. So, of course, in Arizona, do we do that? Or do we do coyotes and javelinas? Well, never. Yeah, probably. So let me just briefly say, if you tried to attend last month's meeting and you got here and you saw the sign that said, sorry, our speaker couldn't make it up from Phoenix because a semi decided to catch fire on the beeline and closed it down. And so he said, by the time I try to reroute to the Globe and come back, it's going to be way too late. I said, nope, we'll cancel, we'll reschedule. And so we did get a date for that. So we don't normally have November meetings, but in this case, we're making an exception because this guy is so good. This is Steve Laconis. He's our animal handler. Let me just read a little bit about his pedigree here. Steve Laconis has served in several key positions in the zoo world, including the Los Angeles Zoo, the Phoenix Zoo, and the Arizona Science Center. Today, his main focus is to use animals to glorify God, and he has presented animals in various ministries, including head zookeeper at the Creation Museum in Petersburg, Kentucky, as well as an animal presenter for Creation Ministries International Canada and the Creation Studies Institute in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. So he's good, and he's really good reaching young audiences, isn't he? Yeah, young audiences. He's good. This presentation from Steve Laconis will include several unique live animals and show how their incredible design can teach us lessons from both God's Word and from creation. A very friendly, kid-friendly event for the entire family. And the date we have is Saturday, November 9th. So it'll be a Saturday night because he's working all week long and he can't get up here and back down. So we said, we'll go for Saturday night. Saturday, November 9th, 7 o'clock to 8:30 right here. Live lessons from creation. So, if you have any more information, it'll be coming later. Yes? I'll be sending out flyers on that. Yeah, and I'll leave this one here. You want to take a picture of it? You can do that right now. No. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, yes. So I'm leaving 2 flyers here, and I'll be mailing out the more flyers like we usually do about 2 weeks before this event. Okay, there's that. We'll have a question and answer session after the presentation formally ends. And at that time, we pass around this beautifully crafted thing here to collect beautifully collected offerings. And we have a book table. Now, normally we bring our own Arizona Origin Science Association books and DVDs. But because we have a guest speaker who his organization shipped us 5 heavy boxes of stuff, we've got his stuff on the table here. And he even has this really nice tablecloth with it. So I invite you to check those things out, and we're trying to figure out how to get the credit card machine to work, and hopefully in the next hour we'll get it, okay? Some of these things come with no instructions, some come with instructions that don't work, and whatever. All right, before I introduce our guest speaker, if you'll bow your heads with me, we'll have a word of prayer to start. Lord Jesus, we thank you for revealing yourself to us as our Creator and as our Savior. We're thankful for this time together that we can come and learn some things that will glorify you as we see how your handiwork reveals your awesome intelligence and wisdom and even love and beauty. And so for this time that we thank you for allowing our speaker to be here tonight, to have safe travels. And we thank you for the preparation that went into the material that we are going to learn this evening. We ask all this and we give you thanks in the name of Jesus, our Savior. Amen. Frank Sherwin is a Navy veteran. No cheers? No. Okay, well, okay. Good job. You chose the right branch. That's what I'm going to say anyway. He has been with the Institute for Creation Research since 96, okay. Yeah, that predates a lot of things, doesn't it? And he's a writer and speaker. His senior lecturer is one of his many titles, and he travels around, and we've had him speak for Arizona Origin Science Association before, and he's got great stuff to share with you, and then, of course, great materials here to follow up with afterwards. So I think that all I really have to say then is, Sherman, will you take it away? And would you give him a warm welcome?
Okay, if I can go ahead, the microphone, there we go.
Oh, instead of the other?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
I had to use one of these when I was
Yeah, open the door there. That's great. All right. Well, good evening, everybody. It's always good to be back in the great state of Arizona. I love Arizona, and no, I don't say that about every state I ever go to. Arizona is the only one, beside my home state of Illinois. I'm a Chicago native. So it is good to be back in Arizona. And, Dr. Cazell, of course, you all know Joseph, and I always stay at his house, and he is a dear, dear friend. And so we go way back. So what we're going to talk about here this evening are obviously hummingbirds. And hummingbirds are amazing, amazing creatures in God's creation. Much more. That is good, Mike. That's much better. People can see it. And when I look at the hummingbird, I think about the fossils, the feathers, the feeding, and the flight. Everything about hummingbirds shouts creation. And so that brings us to Romans chapter 1 and verse 20, where the Apostle Paul says, for the invisible things of him from the creation of the world. Let's say these next two words together, class. Clearly seen. Okay, let's try it again. Clearly seen. God's creation is clearly seen. Now, the Sherwin translation of that is painfully obvious, okay? Being understood by the things that are made, like, for example, the hummingbird. Even his eternal power in Godhead. And then the Apostle Paul ends this verse with a warning, okay? This doesn't come from yours truly or ICR or anybody else. The Apostle Paul says, so they are without excuse. In other words, God's creation is so clear, it is so clear that people are without excuse. And when scientists, secular scientists, are doing work in the laboratory, say with DNA or studying any facet of the biological sciences or the physical sciences, Paul says that those individuals are without excuse. And so it's kind of like the elephant in the lab. You've ever heard that before? Where you've got this massive elephant in the lab called creation, and the scientists are kind of bumping into it and ignoring it and doing their work and all that. And the creation elephant is there in the lab. It's painfully obvious. And natural man, unfortunately, unregenerate man, chooses not to see that elephant. But as Paul says in Romans chapter 1, God's creation is clearly seen. And this is never more true than with God's amazing hummingbird. It really is a fascinating creature. And of course, we find him right here in Arizona as well. Scientists have identified at least 343 different species of the hummingbird, which makes them, and I didn't know this until just a couple of years ago, the second largest family of birds in the world. And so you've got a lot of hummingbirds out there, and they're very, very numerous, the second largest family of birds in the world. That kind of is like mammals. 1/5 of all the mammals in the world are bats. A lot of people didn't think that, bats are mammals. Yeah, they're flying mammals. And so 1/5 of all the mammals are bats, and then, of course, a whole bunch more, about 1/2 of all the mammals are rodents. Those friendly rodents like rats and mice and everything else, but yeah, friendly. Of all the birds of God's creation, the hummingbird, they call him the hummer, just may be the most remarkable. Everything about these creatures shouts design, and of course, design means what? A designer, right? Creation means a creator, absolutely. So the average hummingbird's heart rate is more than 1,200 beats per minute. I had experienced this at one time, and that's when I was anticipating asking my wife to marry me. So my heart rate went up there it was just under 1,200 beats per minute. And so when you look at the hummingbird, you've got this incredible heart rate here, the lungs breathing about 250 times per minute. The tongue works like a micro pump. It doesn't work like a straw at all, and we're going to get into that. The wings isosceles in about the form of a figure 8, and there's a special joint in the wings of the hummingbird, helping them to hover and stay absolutely stationary as they feed from various kinds of flowers and all. So speaking of the hummingbird wings, that brings us to hummingbird flight. And their wings, with a socket and ball joint at the shoulder, can rotate 180 degrees, enabling them to beat a figure 8 anywhere from 50 to 200 times, not per minute, per second. 200 times per second. So that's how the hummingbird is able to hold itself steady, but it also means lots and lots of nutrition, lots of energy, and they must break down that food energy virtually immediately so it can be used for this muscle contraction. So the hummingbird physics of flight is formidable, as you can see here. I'm not going to get into all of this, but there's a lot of physics that goes into the wing and the structure and the way that the wings operate in the hummingbird there. The fast turns of hummingbirds have inspired a massive motion tracking study of the bird's flight maneuvers. And so it is just amazing how they are able to work their wings in such a way that you see there. But again, nothing is left to chance. These the stroke features and the physics involved with it are formidable, to say the least. There are tests exploring how the hummingbirds navigate gaps smaller than their wingspan, and it sheds new light on their amazing abilities. This came out just, I think, a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago, that physicists and also ornithologists, an ornithologist is somebody who studies birds, are able to look at the hummingbird and realize, you know what, they're going through areas that their wings should not fit, and the hummingbirds make a structural configuration smaller so they can go through there and not bump into branches or anything else. It really is quite amazing. Well, not only is it amazing regarding how the wings operate of a hummingbird, but hummingbirds also vocalize. You ever hear about that? No pun intended. But hummingbirds, as you watch them at the feeder, sometimes you'll hear that chirping sound. That's coming from the alpha male. That's the alpha male who's telling the other hummingbirds to stay away. Hummingbirds are a fascinating group of birds, but some aspects of their biology are poorly understood, such as their highly diverse vocal behaviors. And so they are able to vocalize in just a microsecond of a chirp, but in that chirp, in their vocalization is information that other hummingbirds can understand. Some hummingbirds hit notes so high that only a dog can hear them. So it really is quite amazing how they're able to vocalize and how other birds are able to hear what they're quote unquote saying and respond to it. A hummingbird's brain makes up about 4.2% of its total weight, and proportionately, that's the largest of any birds. And that's hardly surprising as we continue to study the hummingbird. 4.2% of its weight. So, unlike a majority of birds, hummingbirds actually learn new vocalizations. The calls and songs of some species appear to have even, and I couldn't believe this when I read it a half a dozen times, even more in common with human language. If I were just to kind of wrap things up here this evening, just by reading that quote, that would be enough to show how incredibly unique hummingbirds are, that they have more in common with human language, with their little chirps, such as conveying information intentionally and using simple forms of some of the elements of human language, look at this, such as phonology, semantics, and syntax. Phonology, semantics, and syntax. Sounds like a law firm. But thank you. And the similarities run deeper, including analogous brain structures that are not shared by species without vocal learning. So the more we're looking into the vocalization of hummingbirds and the brain makeup, the more, I keep using this word, the more amazing it is. Well, here's the question of the evening. It's kind of sad, and if you really love hummingbirds, then you better not look at the next slide, and I'll warn you before I show it. But actually, hummingbirds do have natural predators, okay? And they're very, very able to take care of themselves, except when they get hungry and they go to some of the hummingbird feeders. They figure they can get a free meal. But, well, if you like hummingbirds, you better close your eyes right now. Okay, here we go. Because this is what? What is that creature hanging off of the hummingbird feeder? that is a praying mantis. And so this is a praying mantis, and they get to be pretty big. There's dozens and dozens of varieties and species of praying mantis, and the larger praying mantis will actually hide underneath the hummingbird feeder and then grab the hummingbird as they come along and gobble them up. Sorry, but that's one of the natural predators. And here's poor Mr. Hummingbird right there, and so that's pretty sad. All right. And this is what the praying mantis looks like. The design features of the praying mantis with its serrated edges here of its foreleg is able to ruin the day of many kinds of creatures, including the hummingbird, if the praying mantis is large enough. So we're talking this evening about creation science versus evolution, and we're looking at the hummingbird as an example of creation. So this is a good idea to kind of show, a good quote to show the difference between creation and evolution. So here it is, quote, "Current research suggests that natural selection, whatever that is, has favored smaller genome sizes in hummingbirds and other bird species. Smaller genomes, that is the complete DNA sequence of a creature, smaller genomes require less energy during replication and maintenance, meaning precious resources can be used by flight muscles." So that comes from two evolutionists writing in 2014. Now, how would a creationist say this? You see this quote here, but how would a creationist look at this and use the creation science model instead of evolution? Okay, here's what we would say at ICR. We would say God has designed smaller genomes, that is the total genetic makeup, in hummingbirds and other bird species that require less energy during replication and maintenance, meaning precious resources can be used by flight muscles. So you just see what we're doing. We don't give glory to natural selection, whatever that is. We give glory to the Creator, the one who has created the hummingbirds. And so this is a good way of comparing and contrasting these two models, creation science versus evolution. Well, right now, let's talk about the origin of hummingbirds. Where did hummingbirds come from? Okay, evolutionists believe that the evolutionary process produced all the varieties of hummingbirds that we see today. And it's all through time and chance and natural processes. So that's what they would say. However, what would we say as God's people? Well, we would say that God was there when? In the beginning, right? And that he created hummingbirds as 100% hummingbirds. And so we would say, based on God's word, hummingbirds have always been hummingbirds. See how easy science is. Science is so easy. Hummingbirds have always been hummingbirds, and that they were created on day 5. Okay, and so here we find the creation account. But evolutionists look at that, day 5 of creation, thousands of years ago. That's ridiculous. We don't believe in such nonsense and fairy tales. And the evolutionists believe, and that's a key word right there. Do you see that word? Believe. Evolutionists believe that heavy-tailed theropod dinosaurs, and that's what you see there. I always call them heavy-tailed because when you talk about a theropod dinosaur, they have a long, heavy tail. And so I call them heavy-tailed theropod dinosaurs. And through time and chance and natural selection, supposedly, and genetic mistakes, called mutations, right? Mutations. So they would say, yes, we have heavy-tailed theropod dinosaurs. Time, chance, and genetic mistakes turns that formidable dinosaur into what? A hummingbird. Okay. So I don't believe that American taxpayer-paid public schools should be teaching children this. This is not scientific. It is anything but scientific. It's really science fiction, because the fossil record shows hummingbirds have always been, dinosaurs have always been dinosaurs, okay? And to say that the heavy-tailed theropod dinosaurs became hummingbirds, well, that's a stretch. That's a stretch, okay? And there's no indication that that took place. So the bee hummingbird of China, the bee hummingbird of what is Cuba is the smallest hummingbird in the world. The bee hummingbird of Cuba is so small that the mama bird can make her nest inside of a hollowed out golf ball. So that's pretty small. And so this is the world's smallest bird, but evolutionists have corrupted this, and they say, no, the bee hummingbird is the world's smallest dinosaur. They call it the world's smallest dinosaur. And the American Museum of Natural History has a display, and they actually say that, the world's smallest dinosaur. So this is what Mach said in 2018 in Audubon magazine. The origins of hummingbirds are still a major what, class? Is still a major mystery. And that's fine. As a matter of fact, this evening I'll go ahead and I'll salute them for being intellectually honest and saying that they don't know the origin of hummingbirds. Okay, that's good. I'm glad they admitted it. I'm glad they put it in print. Meanwhile, what do we say as God's people? Yeah, we would say that God created hummingbirds as hummingbirds and the rest of the birds on day 5 of creation just thousands of years ago. And so they say it's a major mystery. Okay, we say God created them. So where did they come from? Well, Arizona State University, right here in the great state of Arizona, has a website called Ask a Biologist. And on the Arizona State University Ask a Biologist, they said, quote, unfortunately, scientists don't know much about how the first hummingbird evolved. Well, again, I appreciate that they said that, but they should have said secular scientists. Secular scientists or evolutionists don't know much about the first hummingbird evolved. And so, again, we would say that the hummingbirds have always been hummingbirds. So that means, folks, if we go to the fossil record, what should we find? Well, that's right. The fossil record shows, and we have 3 different pictures of different hummingbird fossils, and it's amazing that we have found them, but paleontologists, those who study fossils, have found fossils of hummingbirds. And you can see they're halfway between a hummingbird and, no, what are they? They're 100% hummingbirds. The first time that we find them in the fossil record. And by faith, we believe these are sedimentary rock units, and they are sedimentary rock units. Even the most hardcore evolutionist would say, yeah, these are sedimentary rock units, but they believe it was from a local flood. What would we say? Yeah, we would say the global flood, the Genesis flood in the early chapters of the book of beginnings, the book of Genesis. The branch leading to modern hummingbirds, says this evolutionary publication in 2014, arose about 42 million years ago when they split from their sister group, the swifts and tree swifts. Well, again, they can go ahead and say that, but there's no indication that occurred. It's simply theoretical. Why? Because it only happened 42 million years ago. This probably, that's a good scientific word there, this probably happened in Europe or Asia. What was it, Europe or Asia? Where hummingbird-like fossils have been found dating from 28 to 34 million years ago. Well, folks, when they say hummingbird-like fossils, you know what they're saying? Hummingbird fossils. Yes, hummingbird fossils, period. Hummingbird fossils. If they were hummingbird-like fossils, then they should have described, well, what is it about them that are not hummingbird-like? And I've never seen that in the literature. The article actually started with this phrase. They actually used this phrase, quote, but once upon a time, tens of millions of years ago. That's how this 2014 article began in the California Academy of Sciences. Once upon a time, tens of millions of years ago. Margaret Rubin of the University of Connecticut said, quote, the amazing thing about this fossil is that it's essentially what? A modern hummingbird. My mind is a little blown, she said. Where the whole hovering tribe came from remains up in the air. Kind of a play on words there, isn't it? But she's no evolutionist, and she's writing in one of the premier science journals on the planet today. And that science journal is called Science Magazine, volume 304. And so she's saying that the hummingbird fossils that they're finding are essentially 100% fossilized hummingbirds, essentially modern appearance. In an edition of Science Magazine, Dr. Gerald Mayer claims the hummingbird fossils show many striking resemblance to modern hummingbird groups. Well, as that great American philosopher Gomer Pyle said, surprise, surprise, golly. Yeah. And so here it is. They're saying that when we find a hummingbird fossil, it's 100% hummingbird fossil. The new fossils were endowed with long, nectar-sucking beaks and wings. Oops, they used the D word, right? Wings designed. Design means what, class? A designer. Designed for feeding while hovering. And that was said back in 2004, but it's just as apropos this evening. And so when they find these fossils, they're already designed with the nectar-sucking beaks, wings designed for feeding while hovering. In other words, they're what? They're hummingbirds. They're hummingbirds. Always hummingbirds. This is supposedly 30 to 35 million years old, found in Germany. It was identified as an ancient hummingbird. I would challenge that. I would just say it's a hummingbird, okay? We wouldn't say ancient. We would say this hummingbird fossil, by faith, we would say this is buried during the what? The Genesis flood, right? This is in sedimentary rock laid down by running water like you would get with a... flood. Somebody said a flood. That's right. Good. That's a flood. Yeah, and so that's what we would say. So everything points to creation. 100% hummingbird. The fact that it's well preserved indicates that it must have been buried suddenly and rapidly, like a flood. Yeah, and it's entombed in sedimentary, featured in sedimentary rock, again from a flood. Exceptionally well-preserved hummingbird with modern feathering and exceptionally well-preserved Oligocene fossil from southern France. So this was found in 2008. But folks, over and over again, and I don't want to get redundant, folks, over and over again, but I don't want to get redundant, hummingbird fossils, 100% hummingbird fossils, and it doesn't matter whether it's Germany or France or some other part of the world. Every time we uncover, when we unearth a fossil of a hummingbird, you can be sure that it's 100% hummingbird. So there's no real hummingbird evolution, and we would expect that because evolution itself is not true. Evolutionists see hummingbirds as diversifying and evolving over millions of years, and they said it's amazing that evolution can take hummingbirds to such extremes. Well, evolution's got nothing to do with it, folks. Hummingbirds were created by God just thousands of years ago with the genetic structure, the genetic material, their genome intact, ready to do what hummingbirds do very, very effectively. This detailed research, and this is from McGuire that we et al. Back in the early 2000s, was published. Published in April 2014, in which researchers studied DNA from 151 hummingbird species. They suggested, and this is a key word here, they suggested a family tree for hummingbirds. And of course, family trees are based on evolution, going back to the first pair in South America. All the birds studied were hummingbirds, not non-hummingbird ancestors. The study revealed only variation with the hummingbird kind. Let me ask a question this evening. Are we able as creationists to look at varieties of hummingbirds? Yeah, you bet. How about varieties of dogs? Yeah, we've got all sorts of varieties of dogs. We have those great hulking, Mexican Chihuahuas and those little bitty Great Danes that women carry in their purse and everything in between, right? When I was in California, my family and I had a Canardly dog. Have you seen those Canardly dogs? Yeah, I can hardly tell what kind of dog it was, okay? Thank you, thank you. And so dogs have always been dogs. Whether they're cold dogs or they're hot dogs, they're always dogs, 100%. And so same situation applies right here with hummingbirds. Hummingbirds, there's all sorts of variation, all sorts of variety, but that's not real evolution. That's variation within the created kind. So the study only revealed variation within hummingbird kinds. Well, this gets to one of my favorite facets of hummingbirds besides their vision, and that's hummingbird feathers. Feathers are one of the most amazing morphological structures in the biological, or should I say more specifically, the zoological world. And hummingbird feathers, like all bird feathers, show up in the fossil record as 100% feathers. And this is a quote from Pan, writing in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, which is no friend of the creationist, volume 113. And he said, Joel, should I say, said in New York Times 2020, just 4 short years ago, he said, and he's an evolutionist writing in this article, and he said, and I quote, "The feather looks like any feather you might find on the ground." Stop right there. You bet. You bet. Why? Because feathers have always been feathers. The feathers we find today should match up perfectly with feathers that we find in the fossil record. And so here, Joel, in 2020, New York Times, no friend of the creationist, is saying the feather looks like any feather you might find on the ground. But then he steps into the never, never land of evolution when he says the next 3 words, but it's not. Wait a minute, what do you mean it's not? If I pick up a feather in the ground and I compare it with a feather in the fossil record and they match up, hey, that's good empirical research. And what he says is that feather is about 150 million years old. And that gets into the evolutionary interpretation. There's no way to really document that or verify it because the feather doesn't have a little label on it saying 150 million years old. You know, they just have to make that guess. Ultramicroscopy revealed the presence of thousands of molecules called melanosomes. Well, you're going, Frank, what are melanosomes? Melanosomes are the organelles, they're the subcellular structures responsible for the feather's coloration. Well, that, folks, means organic molecules. What are we doing finding organic molecules in feathers that are 150 million years old? You should have no carbon-based material in that feather at all. It should all be part of the mineralization of fossilization. So to start finding melanosomes, which are overtly organic, that is carbon-based, that's quite a discovery, and it does not fit well, it doesn't fit at all with evolutionary naturalism. Okay, speaking of feathers, this is from an evolutionary publication. They've never been able to document this, and so it's theoretical. It's hypothetical. It's simply based on evolution theory, where they draw a diagram showing a scale here, some kind of structure that's not a feather, and somehow the structure starts to get frayed and frayed and frayed even some more, and turns into the incredible structure, as I said earlier, is one of the most significant morphological structures in the living world, in the biological world. Feathers are designed by the creator so that the bird can zipper them and unzipper them, and it's a stretch for evolutionists to say, well, what is that? Help me out here. What's this? Yeah, these are scales, probably of a snake, right? And they say scales, through time and chance and lucky mutations, they have to be good mutations, lucky mutations, what do these scales become? Feathers, right? And so evolutionists say, we can see how scales can become feathers. I can't, okay? My field is zoology. I study animals. And we're talking about the zoo, right? So zoologist, right? What's a zoologist? Somebody who studies animals. What's a zoologist? Somebody who studies zoos, okay? And so I'm a zoologist. I study animals, specifically parasites. That's my field there. But it mentioned the zoo there. And I called the San Diego Zoo last year but the lion was busy. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So anyway, here we have scales turning into feathers, supposedly. This comes from an evolutionary dictionary of biology by Thane. They are the editors of this dictionary of biology. It's a first century publication. And here's what they had to say. They're both evolutionists, but they make the case even better than I could have said it, or any creation scientist could have said it. They said feathers are tubular. Notice they didn't say that about scales. Feathers, they said, are tubular, and the two planar sides of the vein, the back and the front, are created by the inside and outside of the tube only after unfolding from its cylindrical sheath. You can tell this is getting very, very complex as a feather actually forms embryologically. Between the two sides of the scale, develop the top and the bottom of the initial epidermal outgrowth, okay? So there's nothing simple about the formation of a feather, and it begins its formation, it doesn't begin its formation like the scales of a reptile at all. A hummingbird's brilliant throat color is not caused by feather pigmentation, but rather by iridescence in the arrangement of the feathers. And so based on where you're looking at, as you look at a hummingbird, or how the sun strikes the feathers, it will change this iridescence. The feathers of hummingbirds are iridescent due to the inhomogeneous interference structure of platelets on feather barbules. So there's nothing simple about how it is that this iridescence shows up in something like, for example, the hummingbird and also the blue jay. The blue jay has the same kind of iridescence. Diffraction occurs when light impinges on an object whose features are close to the light wavelength. And so basically that's why, as you look at this, depending on how the angle that you're looking at it and the angle as the sun strikes it, you're going to have what's described right here. Inhomogeneous interference structure. Sorry, this is getting complex, but I really want to nail it down that there's nothing simple about any facet of hummingbird biology. Hummingbird iridescence is due to interference colors produced by a stack of about 3 films whose optical thickness is 1/2 the peak wavelength. Each film is a mosaic of platelets of elliptical form. Each platelet is about 2.5 microns long and 1 micron wide. The platelets are not homogeneous and consist of air bubbles encased in a matrix of refractive index of about 2. All of that to say, and of course this is where a picture is worth 10,000 words. Here are the 3 layers that was just talked about in this quota over here. You have the keratin cortex, melanin rodules, and then keratin layers. And depending on, this is a person's eye, depending on the viewing angle, and as the sun strikes it, the ultraviolet energy strikes these 3 layers, depending on where you're standing, you're going to see different facets of what's called the iridescence. Colors that change depending on the angle of illumination or observation. So it's very, very complex, extremely complex. Iridescent colors are colors that change depending on the angle of illumination or observation. They are produced when light is reflected by multi-layer structures that we just saw, those 3 layers in the previous slide, or diffraction by gratings. While this phenomenon is well understood for simple optical systems, look at this, it remains unclear how complex biological structures interact with light to produce iridescence. So as they continue to do the research, it will only show that it is infinitely more complex than we realized, and we can say bye-bye to time and chance as being the result of this. It means there's a lot of very, very sophisticated design features that go into this. There are very few comparative studies at interspecific level, often focusing on single color patch for each species. It gets very, very complex. Well, let's talk about, as we draw to a close here tonight, hummingbird feeding. I entitled this Magic because of what these secular authors are saying. This is May of 2011. In the proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, it states, and I quote, "To drink, you have to swallow. No one has tried to explain how this works yet in hummingbirds. It's considered magic right now." That's what they said. It's considered magic right now, and that comes from the prestigious Proceedings of National Academy of Sciences. The author said, advanced study is needed to understand how a hummingbird absorbs the energy from the nectar it collects in its tongue. More than 350 species of hummingbirds are responsible for pollinating some 8,000 species of flowers worldwide. Surprisingly, hummingbirds have no sense of smell, but they are irresistibly drawn to brightly colored flowers or the bright red color of hummingbird feeders offering sugar water. And is it true? Can hummingbirds just live on sugar water and that's it? No, they need protein, right? So hummingbirds also eat insects. They'll eat insects if they can find them. And these insects provide the protein, but they also need the sugar water for the energy. Hummingbird feeding is irreducibly complex. That's a phrase most of us have probably heard sometime. A phrase that non-evolutionists use to explain the way in which a number of parts must all work together for a structure or process to function. In this case, it starts with the tongue fitting into the flower. It just happens to fit perfectly. The findings could affect thinking about how flowers and hummingbirds have evolved together, said this one evolutionist, since the shape of the flower, the composition of the nectar, and the shape of working of the tongue of the hummingbird, look at this, must all fit together for the system to work. Well, they just answered their own question. It wasn't due to evolution. What you have is the structure of the tongue, the nectar, and the flower all have to be working together so that the hummingbird can feed. One doesn't evolve and then the other. It all has to happen at the same time. And so this is why we call it irreducibly complex. And that's one of my favorite quotes there because they're really making the case for irreducible complexity. Well, this is called drinking biomechanics. High-speed filming and detailed anatomical studies have revealed that they are designed with a long forked tongue that aids in what is called drinking biomechanics. The tongue opens up when it's inserted into the flower, and the nectar is pumped up the tongue by way of 2 grooves. The hummer can do this up to 20 times per second. So that tongue is working very, very rapidly to get that nectar out of the flower, and they're using high-speed photography to show how this is the beak, and then we can see the hummingbird's tongue going into the sugar water there, happening 20 times per second. This is an electron microscope picture of the tip of the hummingbird tongue right here. There's a tip of the tongue, and here it is right here. And it is the 2 grooves that is talked about by way of the 2 grooves. And when I was an undergraduate at Western State College in Gunnison, we were taught, the professor taught us, well, it's just like taking a straw, and you hold your thumb over the straw and then let go after you've inserted into a liquid like pop or something like that, and naturally the liquid will go up the straw up to a certain length. And they were saying that is how hummingbirds drink. But that turned out to be totally wrong. This is a lot more sophisticated and a lot more efficient. The traditional explanation of nectar being drawn up by what is called capillary action is simply incorrect. And so again, that's an electron picture there. So here it is, drinking biomechanics. There is a picture, a drawing of the hummingbird tongue. Actually, they're tiny elastic micropumps. That is so amazing. Tiny electric micropumps that spring open to draw in nectar, and the tongue spontaneously folds into 2 conjoining tubes when extended. So it's not by capillary action at all. Getting a little bit more detail, here are the elastic micropumps, and we can see the nectar and the tongue protrusion going in and getting the nectar to flow. And here's an electron micrograph picture. It's really a drawing of the cylindrical tongue grooves of the hummingbird. Nothing simple about it all. My question this evening is, how did something like this evolve? Through time and chance and natural processes. What was the intermediate stage to this elastic micropump that would still feed the hummingbird so it wouldn't starve to death? So the first time that we find this elastic micropump in the hummingbird beak, it is ready to get nectar right away because the hummingbird needs it for energy. So it can lick anywhere from 15 to 20 times per second. And this is just another way of looking at the design features, what we call the morphology of the hummingbird beak and the tongue. Now that zoologists have determined how the hummingbird tongue works to collect nectar, they plan to continue their research to determine how the birds are able to swallow. Their tongues can flick into nectar as much as 20 times per second, so the swallowing would need to be rather quick action as well. Remember the previous slide we saw? What's the word they used? Magic. So when they finally determined how this is done, but they could not give glory to time and chance and natural processes, but they're not about to give glory to God because they don't believe in God. But certainly when they find out, it makes the case for creation. Remember that elephant in the lab that they're ignoring? Well, this gets to hummingbird metabolism, I think will be done. Hummingbirds are the Flash of the animal world. Okay? They really are. They are incredibly fast in what they do. And so I call them the Flash in the animal world. As a matter of fact, when you take a thermograph picture of a hummingbird as it's feeding, this is what it looks like. And you can see areas of the hummingbird which are very, very high in heat energy. On a gram per gram basis, hovering hummingbirds use energy at about 10 times the rate of a highly trained human athlete at their peak performance. So this is really quite amazing how they're able to do that. They produce a lot of heat. How hummingbirds avoid overheating, according to BBC News, no friend of the creationist. Colorful footage shot with thermal camera has revealed how hummingbirds avoid overheating as they beat their wings up to 70, some say 80 times per second. God designed the birds with windows for heat loss around their eyes, around their shoulder joints, and their feet and legs. And so this is how hummingbirds don't burn up, literally. God has designed their anatomy in such a way that the heat is radiated out so they don't cook themselves. Hummingbirds are designed to digest sucrose. What's sucrose? Sucrose is table sugar, right, table sugar. And so sucrose is made up of two monosaccharides. Sucrose is what we call a disaccharide, and this disaccharide sucrose is made up of glucose and fructose, and it's held together by an oxygen atom. So what you see is a sucrose is a disaccharide. Di means what? Two, okay? Two monosaccharides. You've heard of glucose before, right? And fructose is the sweetest of all of the monosaccharides. But it's, well, I won't get into that. But hummingbirds are designed to digest table sugar, the sugar found in floral nectar, with 97% efficiency for converting the sugar into energy. And that's how they get their energy. But it doesn't stop there. They're equally adept at burning both glucose and fructose, which are the individual components of sugar, a unique trait other vertebrates cannot achieve. And this was said back in 2013. And so it is amazing. These little hummingbirds have the enzymatic ability, the enzymes, the biological catalyst to effect breaking down these monosaccharides into usable forms of energy. Hummingbird flight is the most energetically demanding form of vertebrate locomotion, yet these birds can be seen buzzing around blossoms at high elevation where oxygen concentrations are so low that humans become faint and are left gasping for breath. So how do the hummingbirds do it? Well, good question. Good question. God designed the hummingbird with very small red blood cells, which have a greater surface to area volume ratio, enabling oxygen to be transferred to the large and powerful flight muscles quickly. And here's a picture of the hummingbird red blood cells. They're much smaller, which means that they have a higher surface area to exchange carbon dioxide and oxygen, and these are nucleated red blood cells, which is interesting. Mammals, such as people, we have anucleate red blood cells. We have blood cells that are not, that don't have a nucleus. And so everything about the hummingbird shouts design. Well, we're out of time here, but let me just say one or two things about hummingbird vision, because this is just my introduction. And I was going to get into the main point, but we're already out of time. This is the electromagnetic spectrum. This is what you and I see on a daily basis, okay? This is a visible spectrum of light, and it's a very, very narrow sliver of the entire, what we call electromagnetic spectrum. This is what we can see. We cannot see in the ultraviolet. We can't see in the infrared because we don't need to, okay? And so, but hummingbirds have eye structure, specifically portions of their retina, which has special cells that can determine into the ultraviolet. Hummingbird vision is a marvel. The creators designed the hummingbirds with a variety of color vision that exceeds that of people. Surprise, surprise. This unique vision helps birds to see nectar-producing plants. That's why. So they can see the nectar-producing plants, potential mates, predators, and objects within their range. Birds have 4 color cone types in their eyes compared to only 3 that you and I have in our retina, what we call these photoactive spectral cells in our retina. In theory, this enables birds to discriminate a broad range of colors, including many non-spectral colors, colors that we don't, well, I won't get into that, but many non-spectral colors. Non-spectral colors are perceived when non-adjacent cone types, sensitive to widely separated parts of light spectrum, are predominantly stimulated. For people, purple stimulation is non-spectral color. Birds' 4th cone color type creates many more possibilities. In other words, okay, and this is the last slide that we'll see tonight. In addition to the 3 types of color cones people have in their eyes, birds, like the hummingbirds, have 1 more. Not only are they sensitive to red, green, and blue light, they can also pick up on ultraviolet rays. The hummingbird's 4th cone color type allows it to see colors we cannot even imagine. So in other words, this is a color that we see, what people see, but this is the colors that birds see in the same bird, So we only see this, but hummingbirds, in other words, a whole new vista of colors and vision is what the hummingbirds can see because they have 1 extra cone cell. And that makes all the difference, allowing them to see into the ultraviolet. Okay, well and then here's just a way of comparing them, okay? So these are people, these are bees. I have a whole presentation just on bees. Bees can see way over into the ultraviolet here, and these are the nectar guides that bees pick up on when they look at flowers. You have those nectar guides we learned about in grade school. And then here's the hummingbird. They also can see into the ultraviolet as well, but obviously people cannot. We don't need to. So, can we have